Why I Believe in God. Part 5, E for Enlighten. This is part 5 of a 7-part series. In each part I explore a keyword that starts with the letters of the word believe. In part 5 I explore E for Enlighten. I believe in God because God enlightens me. So, in English, what does the word enlighten mean? It means to give someone greater knowledge and understanding about a subject or situation, or in short, to shed light on a topic. So reflecting on my personal physical life, a recent example comes to my mind. I was always interested in living a healthy life and living a long life till ripe old age. And I was searching on YouTube for ways by which I could do this. I came across a lot of channels that talked about fitness, exercise, dental health, the lifestyles of people living in the 5 blue zones, which had the longest living populations. These websites offered me intellectual knowledge, but then by chance in October 2016, I came across the YouTube channel of chrisbeatcancer.com, and I heard how Chris, who had cancer, had made the decision to not undergo chemotherapy, but instead opted for a complete change in lifestyle and switched to a vegetarian-based diet. Now this video, I must say, enlightened me because I felt that if Chris could beat cancer through a change in lifestyle and adopting a vegetarian lifestyle, it could help me achieve the aim that I wanted. And with that enlightenment in the way I saw food and about the purpose of food in my life, it was easy for me to instantaneously switch to being a 90% vegetarian and to start juicing carrots on a daily basis for me and my family. So if that was enlightenment on the physical realm, what is enlightenment in the spiritual realm? So in my past spiritual life, I always lived a life by faith. I was born into a faith. I got faith from people who passed it on around me, who passed it on to me. I believed in faith that allowed me to trust in God and take leaps into the unknown, which otherwise I would not have been able to take. So I had a childlike innocence that allowed me to believe in God on the basis of faith alone. But something changed in March 2017. I stumbled across a YouTube video by a man called Ravi Zacharias. Now, I have never heard of Ravi Zacharias before, but I learned that he was an apologetic. I didn't know what the word apologetic meant, and hence I researched Ravi and I found that he ran a ministry called RZIM with the slogan, helping the believer think and the thinker believe. Now this line of thinking was new to me. I always thought that faith was blind and that faith and reason did not go together, and that in order to believe I had to put reason to one side. This was one of the reasons why for the last 3, 4, 5 decades I kept my faith to myself and never openly discussed it with anyone. I honestly thought that I must be gullible in order to believe in God. But then I saw so many thousands of people who also believed in God, and I wondered whether they too were gullible and whether they believed solely on faith. And I never thought that we could openly discuss our faith because it was a matter of blind belief. And this was one of the reasons why I thought that people who follow any other religion are also doing the right thing, as it is a matter of what they believe. And I thought that people who did not believe in God were also doing the right thing, for it was a matter of how they believed and whether they believed in God or not. And when I found that science was able to make progress and explain a lot of the things that were happening around us, I thought that people who trusted science and not in God were also right, as they could see an explanation for things where people of faith trusted in God. But all that changed with this one video of Ravi Zacharias. I don't even know what Ravi was talking about. It does not really matter, because all that matters is that I had the realization that faith and reason could go hand in hand. I also understood that apologetics was the reasoned arguments or writings in justification of something, typically a theory or religious doctrine. That was when I felt that after all these years, God had enlightened me to what St. Peter had written in chapter 3, verses 15 to 16. always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Now this really was powerful enlightenment to me. In my past so many years I had never come across this line. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. And this line made me try and understand my belief in God all the more, not only through blind faith alone, but through thinking about God and understanding God and His works through reason. Psalm 146 verse 8 says, God enlightens, which means the Lord opens the eyes of the blind. I believed in the past in God, but that was through blind faith, which means that I was spiritually blind. I had eyes physically, but I didn't have eyes spiritually. But now I felt that God had opened the eyes of my mind, my heart, my soul, and I was now able to see. I also understood what Stephen Hawking meant when he said, Heaven is a fairy tale for those afraid of the dark. Because I was one who believed in God because I was afraid of the dark. I was afraid of the devil. I was afraid of hell. But now I believe in God because I have been enlightened by God. And some people who do not believe in God because they are unenlightened, and in the words of Professor John Lennox, who responded by saying, if religion is a fairy tale of those afraid of the dark, then atheism is a fairy tale of those afraid of the light. So I say to myself, if the atheist saw the light, they would be enlightened and they would no longer be atheists, because they would not be afraid of the light, and they would know that God is light, and in Him is no darkness at all. So for me, enlightenment means that I am no longer in the dark, but that I am in the light, and I have come to be convinced by reason that God exists and I exist in His image. I now understand why Stephen Hawking says heaven is a fairy tale for those afraid of the dark. And that is because I believe Stephen Hawking himself is in the dark, and that he is not afraid of the dark because, as a clever person, he is able to understand the going-ons in the dark. For that reason, he feels assured that he can explain things through science and the laws of physics, and hence has no need for God. But even though Stephen Hawking is such a clever person, one thing that Stephen Hawking fails to see is that he is in the dark, and that he is looking at the world around him from the lens of darkness, and in a sense, he is spiritually blind. So what is needed for Stephen Hawking to believe is a paradigm shift, for him to acknowledge that in the spiritual realm he is ignorant, and that he is not as smart as he is in the physical realm. He needs to move over to the light, and in realizing that darkness is the absence of light, he is enlightened, which means that he is no longer blind spiritually, and then he can explore the physical world around him through the lens of light. And then he no longer needs atheism, which is a fairy tale created by those afraid of the light. Or in other words, atheism is no longer needed when we stop existing purely at the physical realm, but take a step into the spiritual realm. Atheists fail to understand that we as humans exist both as spiritual and physical beings, and just being physical alone is not sufficient. We need to move into the spiritual realm and think as spiritual beings as well. I'm so thankful to God that He enlightened me, so that I can see myself as a special person with a divine purpose, that something has got to be done with my life, that I have a soul, and that I'm a spiritual being, and that I'm just not stardust and the remnant of a massive explosion in the galaxies. Now that would have been my thinking if I chose to just remain in the physical realm. I would just consider myself stardust and to be the remnant of some massive explosion that took place in the galaxies millions of years ago. But I'm so thankful to God that He has enlightened me and that I can move into the spiritual realm and know that I am a special person with a divine purpose. So the big question for me is, how do I move from the physical realm and connect to the spiritual realm to seek spiritual enlightenment? So what is spiritual enlightenment? For me, I remember posting a Facebook album and labeling it Life in the Slow Lane. And it was really life in the slow lane because it was pictures of the countryside, of birds, of nature, of trees. So in the same way, seeking spiritual enlightenment means getting off the fast lane, switching gears and living life in the slow lane. So the first thing I need to do to gain spiritual enlightenment is to retreat away from the physical world into the world of peace and quiet, when I can put myself in the presence of God and listen to the whisper that comes from the stillness of my soul. I need to pray and I need to read the inspired word of God, the scriptures. The second thing I need to do in order to gain spiritual enlightenment is to detoxify myself of all the earthly possessions, to become detached and to focus on laying up treasures in heaven. As Matthew chapter 6:19 states, "Do not lay up treasures for yourself on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So I am to treasure God most of all. When God is my treasure, I will commit my resources, my money, my time, my talents to His work in this world. I remember my poor mother, who did not have much, but whatever little she had, she would put aside for us, her 3 children, so that we could have a life that was better than hers. But when I grew up and understood what she had done, I was tremendously grateful for her sacrifices on one side, but on the other side I could not help thinking that this was her money and that she should have used it for her own health and well-being, and that we, her children, were now big and strong and more than capable of earning our own money. In other words, I guess what I was saying was that my mother should have stopped fretting about our physical futures and just trusted in God, and should have been laying up spiritual treasures for herself and her children in heaven, that her gold should have had eternal value, not just temporal value. So, in conclusion, I would like to sum up the fact that I believe in God because God enlightens me with the following 3 takeaways. Takeaway number 1, I have been enlightened to the fact that my belief in God should not rely on faith alone, but needs to be complemented by reason, in accordance with what St. Peter has written in chapter 3, verses 15 and 16. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. I repeat, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Takeaway number 2. I have been enlightened to the fact that atheists love the darkness and are able to make sense of the darkness. But if the atheists let the light enter their lives, they would be enlightened and no longer be atheists, because they are now not afraid of the light, because they will have known that God is light and in Him there is no darkness at all. And the words of Professor John Lennox ring true. If religion is a fairy tale of those who are afraid of the dark, then atheism is a fairy tale of those afraid of the light. I repeat, if religion is a fairy tale of those afraid of the dark, then atheism is a fairy tale of those afraid of the light. Finally, takeaway number 3. I have been enlightened to the fact that enlightenment cannot happen in the fast lane. It can only happen when life is lived in the slow lane. And when in the slow lane, I need to take time off for retreating into the stillness of my soul, where I can hear God's whisper, and secondly, by detoxification of earthly possessions and laying up treasures in heaven. Amen.